They said Africa couldn't do it. They said it was too dangerous, too complex, too advanced for a continent they'd written off as incapable. But while the world was busy underestimating Africa, something absolutely historic just happened that nobody saw coming.
Tembegile is that the reactor at the nuclear power station in Koeberg has been shut down.
South Africans have been enjoying lower stages of power cuts since the start of 2024, but the country is not out of the woods yet.
South Africa just proved every single one of them wrong, and the silence from Western experts right now is deafening. This is the story of how one African nation pulled off what most developed countries are still struggling with, and why what just happened at Koeberg nuclear power station is about to change everything you thought you knew about Africa's capabilities. Picture this. It's 2025 and Africa's only nuclear power plant just got approved to run for another 20 years, until 2045, not because someone did them a favor, not because standards were lowered, but because after the most intense safety evaluation imaginable, African engineers proved they've been operating nuclear reactors at world-class level for 40 straight years while everyone doubted they could. The same people who spent decades saying Africa wasn't ready for advanced technology are now scrambling to rewrite their reports. Because Koeberg didn't just pass the test, they dominated it, and that changes everything. Let me be absolutely clear about what just happened. Nuclear regulators don't play games, they don't give out participation trophies, they don't say good enough. Either you meet every single safety standard or you don't. There's no middle ground when you're dealing with nuclear power. The National Nuclear Regulator spent years examining every detail of Koeberg's operations: seismic safety, reactor pressure vessels, emergency protocols, steam generators, radiation containment, cooling systems, personnel training, compliance with international standards, the kind of inspection that makes European facilities nervous. And Koeberg passed everything. Unit 2 just got its 20-year extension after Unit 1 got approved in July 2024, which means South Africa secured both reactors, locked in nuclear stability for 2 decades, planted a flag in the future, and told the world Africa isn't asking for permission anymore. Here's what makes this absolutely wild. For 40 years, since the early 1980s, South Africa has been running this nuclear plant through political upheaval, economic crisis, leadership changes, global energy chaos, and it never failed, never had a major incident, never gave anyone a reason to doubt. It just kept delivering clean, stable power while the world assumed it would eventually collapse. That assumption was based on nothing but prejudice. Because the data tells a completely different story. Unit 2 achieved 100% energy availability for 241 consecutive days this year. Think about that. 241 days of absolute perfection, no interruptions, no failures, no excuses, just flawless operation of one of the most complex machines humanity has ever built. Meanwhile, countries that were supposed to be nuclear leaders are shutting down reactors, struggling with safety issues, abandoning nuclear programs they can't maintain. But Africa, the continent they said wasn't ready, just proved they've mastered what the so-called experts couldn't sustain. And here's why this matters way beyond just one power plant. Koeberg produces 1,860 megawatts of electricity, not when the sun is shining, not when the wind is blowing, but 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, regardless of weather, time, or conditions. You want to understand Africa's energy crisis. Every time the sun sets on solar farms, every time wind turbines slow down, every time drought hits hydroelectric dams, millions of Africans lose power, factories shut down, hospitals go dark, businesses collapse, and the entire economy takes a hit. But nuclear doesn't care about any of that. It runs at 2 a.m. when everything else stops, it powers steel plants through storms, it keeps data centers online when demand spikes, it's the backbone that holds the entire grid together when everything else fails. Without Koeberg, South Africa loses 1,860 megawatts of baseload power overnight. That's not a small gap you fill with a few solar panels. That's a catastrophic hole that would take billions of dollars, years of construction, massive land use, and technology that doesn't exist at scale to replace. Try replacing it with renewables alone. You'd need enormous solar farms that only work during daytime, thousands of wind turbines that only work when it's windy, and battery storage capacity that literally hasn't been built yet anywhere on Earth at the scale needed. Try replacing it with gas. Congratulations, you just made yourself dependent on imported fuel, vulnerable to global price swings, and you're still emitting carbon while spending billions on infrastructure. Try replacing it with coal, politically impossible, environmentally disastrous, economically backwards, and exactly what the world is trying to move away from. So what does the 20-year extension actually give South Africa? Time, the most valuable resource in any transition. 20 years to build renewable infrastructure properly without panic, 20 years to expand transmission lines, 20 years to develop storage solutions, 20 years to attract industries that need stable power to operate. Because here's what nobody talks about. Investors don't build billion-dollar factories in countries where electricity disappears randomly. Manufacturers don't set up operations where the grid is unstable. Tech companies don't build data centers where power cuts are normal. But with Koeberg secured until 2045, South Africa can now promise 2 decades of reliable electricity, and that changes everything. EV production, green hydrogen exports, battery manufacturing, semiconductor facilities, advanced tech clusters. These industries need rock-solid power guarantees or they go somewhere else, and now South Africa has that guarantee. But here's where this story becomes bigger than just South Africa. Egypt is building El Dabaa nuclear plant right now, 4,800 megawatts with 4th-generation 3+ reactors that will provide 10% of Egypt's electricity by 2030. And just 2 days ago, on November 19, 2025, they installed the first reactor pressure vessel with Egypt's president and Russia's president both watching. This isn't a future plan, this is happening today. Nigeria is negotiating for small modular reactors. Kenya built a nuclear regulatory authority preparing for their first reactor. Ghana, Rwanda, Uganda, Zambia are training engineers, drafting nuclear legislation, signing cooperation agreements, building the foundations for their own nuclear programs. Why? Because Koeberg proved it's possible, not in theory, not in some Western country with unlimited resources, but in Africa on African soil, run by African engineers, maintained by African technicians, regulated by African authorities. For decades, the world told Africa to aim small, stick to diesel generators, accept donor-funded solar panels, be grateful for whatever scraps of technology you can import, don't dream too big because advanced systems are beyond your capability. Koeberg shattered that narrative completely. It showed African nations they don't have to accept limits other people try to impose. They can operate at the highest levels of global engineering. They can master technologies that even wealthy nations struggle with. They can build energy independence instead of staying dependent on imports and aid. And here's the secret nobody wants to admit. The reason Koeberg succeeded isn't the technology, it's the people. The African workforce that runs this plant is world-class, engineers trained to international nuclear standards, technicians who know these reactors like surgeons know the human body, safety teams that treat every single shift like lives depend on it, because they do, regulators who refuse to compromise on even the smallest requirement. This isn't a foreign operation with expat managers. This is Africans running the show, making the decisions, solving the problems, maintaining the systems, and they've been doing it flawlessly for 4 decades while the world assumed they'd fail. Velify Ntili, Eskom's chief nuclear officer, put it perfectly. The 20-year extension for Unit 2 following Unit 1's extension last year is the result of hard work, focus, and dedication of highly skilled and competent employees. The rigorous safety assessments demonstrate the depth of nuclear engineering talent available in South Africa. Think about what that means. South Africa built a talent pipeline so strong that when Egypt started building El Dabaa, when Nigeria explored nuclear options, when Kenya formed their nuclear authority, they all looked to Koeberg not as a cautionary tale but as the model to follow. The world expected Africa to learn nuclear technology from the West. Instead, Africa is teaching Africa. Knowledge is flowing from Cape Town to Cairo, from South African engineers to Nigerian scientists, from Koeberg's decades of experience to the next generation of African nuclear professionals across the continent. This is the shift that terrifies the old power structure, because once Africa proves it can master the most advanced energy technology on Earth, what else becomes possible? If one African country can run nuclear flawlessly for 40 years, what happens when 10 countries do it? When 20 countries do it? What happens when Africa stops being an energy importer and becomes an energy exporter? What happens when African manufacturing rivals Asia because electricity is abundant and stable? What happens when African data centers compete with Silicon Valley because the power never goes out? What happens when African green hydrogen becomes the global standard because nuclear provides unlimited clean energy to produce it? That's the future Koeberg just unlocked. And it's a future the old guard never imagined possible. South Africa's plan, IRP 2025, maps out a massive expansion of renewables, battery storage, gas infrastructure, regional hydro integration, gradually phasing out coal. But here's what makes or breaks that entire vision. All of it depends on having an unshakable foundation underneath. Baseload power that doesn't fluctuate with weather, doesn't depend on fuel imports, doesn't collapse when stress hits the grid, and nuclear is the only option that provides that stability at the scale needed. Without Koeberg, the entire transition becomes impossible. With Koeberg secured for 2 more decades, South Africa gets the breathing room to build the future properly instead of lurching from crisis to crisis. And the psychological impact ripples across the entire continent. When African leaders see South Africa succeeding with nuclear, when they see Egypt building El Dabaa, when they see the expertise developing and the results delivering, it breaks the mental barrier that says certain technologies are off limits for African nations. Suddenly, the conversation shifts from "can we do this" to "how fast can we do this?" From "should we attempt nuclear" to "which reactor design fits our needs best?" From dependence on foreign experts to training our own nuclear engineers. Koeberg earned the NASCAR Safety Award more than 14 times. Recognized by the International Atomic Energy Agency, part of a global group of over 120 reactors that extended service beyond 40 years, this isn't charity, this isn't lowered standards, this is African excellence competing at the highest global level and winning. Imagine Africa in 2040. Renewable energy thriving because nuclear provides the stable foundation beneath it. Countries exporting finished green products instead of raw materials because electricity is abundant. Manufacturing hubs rivaling anywhere on Earth because power instability is solved. Data centers, robotics facilities, EV industries, biotech labs operating at global standards because the grid is rock solid. Children born in South Africa today will grow up never knowing the energy poverty their parents experience. Students can study nuclear engineering knowing real careers exist. Entrepreneurs can build businesses without fear that power cuts will destroy their investments. And for every other African nation watching, the blueprint is real, the proof exists, the pathway is clear. Nuclear energy isn't some impossible dream for Africa, it's operational reality right now in Cape Town, and it's expanding across the continent. When African nations negotiate for new nuclear capacity now, they're not begging. They're demanding technology transfer, local job creation, skills development, because Koeberg proved Africa doesn't need to be taught how to run nuclear plants. Africa already knows. This is African excellence that the world tried to deny. This is capability that stereotypes said didn't exist. This is the future that's being built right now while doubters scramble to catch up. Koeberg standing strong until 2045 and beyond isn't just an energy story. It's a declaration that Africa will define its own technological destiny, that African engineers will master whatever systems they choose to master, that African nations will build whatever future they decide to build, and nobody gets to tell them it's impossible anymore because they already did it. Hit that subscribe button because Africa's energy revolution is just getting started.